Hi, you guys, and welcome back to the podcast.
We are the Carwells.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are, as you know, Airbnb interior designers and investors. Welcome back, everyone, to our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have Michael and Liz Chang. Hi, guys. How are you?
Hey, guys.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Super excited to be here.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Emily, for having us.
Absolutely. Well, we're super excited to kind of dive in and see what kind of knowledge we can pull out of you for our listeners, because you guys have so much experience. Before we really get into it, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves to those of our listeners that may not know you already?
Sure. That'll be great. So yeah, I'm Liz. I'm a short-term rental investor and entrepreneur. So Michael and I started our short-term rental business back in 2017 while we were both still working full-time. Now it's our full-time jobs. We both quit our corporate jobs a couple years later. And now we have a portfolio of 26 properties in Philadelphia and the Smoky Mountain, Tennessee. We use like a hybrid strategy of rental arbitrage and buying. So prior to doing short-term rental full-time, I worked in the corporate fashion world for about 8 years, advising brands with product offering, sales forecast, and international store expansion. And yeah, we're here super excited to share our story with your listeners. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I know Emily's face just lit up on the fashion front.
Yeah, my master's degree is actually in global retailing, so it was about taking companies international, and I really wanted to be in the fashion industry, so that was like my start before I got into Airbnb.
Didn't you get
here? We have something common here.
Yeah, you went to like Dubai and Kuwait City to open up Kate stores.
Kate
Spade.
I got my master's, and then COVID hit, so I didn't actually end up working in that industry at all. I jumped right into Airbnb, but I'm hoping eventually to start my own clothing company eventually down the road.
Very cool. Very
cool. That's super cool.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough act to follow. But I'll give a brief intro myself. Michael Chang. Liz and I, again, we started a business in 2016 here in New York, so we remote manage everything. I come from a finance background. I got my MBA from Cornell, and I was an investment banker for 10 years here in New York. I was an M&A banker at Citi and Merrill Lynch, done a kind of $40 billion of deals over my career. So, we really approached this business with a very analytical, our combination of skills. We've built this business, being very analytical and very financial, but we also have the fashion design that really draws people into the properties. But we're able to operate it with kind of with an investment banking mindset. So very, very numbers oriented, very, very data oriented, and that mix of skills has contributed to our journey, our successful journey thus far.
Yeah, definitely
super balanced partnership.
You couldn't have asked for a better pair specifically for this industry.
I've been lucky. I mean, we've gotten the COVID tailwind too. So, part of it's just being lucky with timing, but also part of it's just being in the right place at the right time. So
yeah, you gotta play the game to hit those lucky points, though. That's always part of it. Is everyone's like, oh, that guy just got lucky, and I'm like, no, he was taking that risk on the front end no matter what.
He wasn't there in March 2020 when you stared at 40 properties with an empty calendar. There's the ups and there's the downs. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are super excited. I'm especially excited to kind of dive into this strategy of, balancing arbitrage and purchasing, because I think that that's super brilliant. But before we get into that, as our listeners know, we start every single episode with an Airbnb horror story to keep it real. So why don't you guys kick this episode off with an Airbnb horror story?
Oh, Liz is a great one.
Okay. So a horror story. This is kind of funny now I think about it, but during the first year when we were hosting, we were both still working full-time, as I mentioned before. And one of the guests, they were a couple. They were there for the weekend. And all of a sudden, the morning of checkout, they were like, hey guys, we had a great time, but I have something to tell you. We broke your bed last night by accident. And we were like, okay, we have a check-in in 2 hours. What do we do? But they were really nice about it. They were like, we will pay for the damage. Just let us know how to proceed. So we were scrambling and trying to find delivery all over the place. Amazon doesn't work. It's 2-day shipping. So we go driving, having my family driving all around
I
the
remember
neighborhood
that.
to find a bed to replace within 2 hours, a handyman. So that was kind of our very first taste of how to really remote manage in a way while, running an Airbnb business. So that was a good one to start as
Did
a
you
new
get a
host.
bed in 2 hours? Did it work out?
Yes, we actually did. We happened to find, I think we found this like very local store, small shop, furniture
Yeah.
shop, just down the street that I didn't even know it exists. And then just asked him, "Do you have a bed?" And he's like, "Yes, I have something." It wasn't anything fancy, but it worked. Anything you have, I will take it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how much, let me take it.
Any functioning bed, please.
Yeah,
but
any
buy
functioning
a
thing
car.
works. Yes.
So,
Exactly.
mind me asking, was the bed that broke, was it a metal bed? Was it a wood slat bed? Like, what kind of bed are we dealing with? Because I know that for us, we've gone through that situation so many times.
Same. So that was an IKEA with bed frame, and we
Mhm.
learned we kind of avoid that right now. It breaks easily. It
Too
doesn't
easily.
hold the weight.
Yeah,
What?
I totally
Yeah.
agree.
It's
What
not
we've
commercial grade.
what we found in like if you are gonna buy the IKEA beds or the Wayfair, like really inexpensive bed frames, we always tell people to get like a thin, like 4-inch box spring to put in between the mattress and the bed, and it just like more evenly distributes that weight. And so far, that has been our fix to that issue. Like we
Yeah,
have
that's
not
smart.
had
That
a
makes
box spring
so much
break.
sense.
That's
Yeah,
really smart,
well,
actually.
that and once in a while somebody's just going to be crazy and maybe that box spring won't work. The reality is once in a while your beds are going to break, unfortunately. But it's so nice that they told you because that doesn't always happen. Sometimes people will
Yeah.
leave your place trashed and they just leave hoping that like once they're gone nothing will happen. So them telling you is actually a really nice thing. that
Yeah,
they
it probably
did.
gave you
Yeah.
guys like an extra 45 minutes of reaction time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's a horror because it's like, we were both working and we're like, oh my God, like, and it was the first time we encountered this. It was like, oh my God, what do we do?
Yeah.
And then, I think this business, you just learn to expect the unexpected and just like approach it like, okay, like, how do we solve it? And, 9 times out of 10, you actually do just solve it.
Yeah.
You're like,
Just don't panic.
just don't panic.
Yeah, you were thrown into the lion's den on
Yeah, we were just talking about that in a podcast that we recorded right before this, and same exact thing. It's like when I first started hosting, anytime that a fire would happen, like I would just get super anxious. My body would just be filled with anxiety, and like I would have clouded judgment, and it would be really difficult to come up with a situation to solve it. And now, like, anytime a fire happens, I like out loud say, I'm like, Sarah, get rid of the anxiety, calm down, solution only. Like, that's all that can be in your brain right now. And that's helped so much. But it's like, you have to get to that point where you're like, expansion for bullshit is so wide that you're like, okay, 98% of things are solvable. Like it will be okay. Like nobody's dying, nobody's bleeding out. No, it's fine. We can solve this. So, but yeah, you do start in those very anxious, like fast-paced, oh shit moments.
Yeah. Especially in
Yeah.
the beginning. But yeah, we all survive eventually. And learn not to panic. Yeah, you just learn not to panic. Like, okay, like
Yeah.
we'll figure it out.
Experience gives you a lot for sure.
Yeah. So, okay, well, we've got a few questions here. Let's kind of get into the juicier stuff because I'm super excited to hear you guys' strategy because I think you're doing it really, really well and you're doing it at a very fast pace. So, I know that you've got my attention watching you guys kind of scale. So, why don't we start there? Can you give us kind of a background on your portfolio and how you got from where you started to where you are now?
Sure. So we started with 1 3-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York. And it was definitely nothing special. It's like $2,400 a month of rent. We're both still working. We heard about Airbnb and wanted to kind of just give it a shot and see how it would do. In the first 2 months, like you didn't need a finance degree to see the power of this model. We're consistently doing $8,000 to $10,000 a month on a very, very basic 3-bedroom apartment. And yeah, and it was like cash flowing 3-4K a month. We're like, okay, like if we do 10 of these, like we don't have to, one of us can quit our jobs. So that was really the beginning of the journey. And, that was 2017. I think today, so that was in New York, but today we just remote manage. Our portfolio is in Philadelphia and Tennessee. So we own 6 vacation rental cabins in Tennessee. And then the rest are apartments in Philadelphia that we use the rental arbitrage strategy. And just as a quick primer, rental arbitrage, for people that don't know what that means, is you rent an apartment from a landlord with their permission to put it on Airbnb. You pay them a monthly rent, and you make the difference or an arbitrage between the long-term rent and what you can make as the short-term rental. So that, in essence, is rental arbitrage. You don't have to buy the property; you're renting it with the full permission of the landlord to use it as an Airbnb.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
thank
like that you
you.
say that permission aspect because some people do skip that part. And mind me asking, but so like Queens is obviously a pretty big area of New York, like a really popular area. What are the regulations? I haven't really looked into the New York market at all. I know some people that are investing in upstate, but how do
Mhm.
you like, is there really strict regulations? How does that work in such a big city?
Yeah, I mean, New York now, the rules have evolved and changed to be much more strict. So there was actually some new regulations that were passed this year. So in New York City, it's very, very difficult to have an Airbnb business. If you live there and have a spare room, then it's compliant with the regulations. But if you don't live there, it is not compliant. So I wouldn't recommend anyone starting a rental arbitrage business in New York City. I mean, people do it as a side hustle for cash. But for us, we're really focused on building a business, something long term sustainable. Just given we have a family, so kind of running those ups and downs would not be ideal for us.
Yeah, for New York, the only way to do it probably is midterm rental. You have to be 31 days plus.
Yeah, which is a move as well. For our listeners, if you are in New York, sorry if you can hear this train in the background, but if you are in New York, like I remember the first time I stayed in an Airbnb in New York, I had to like crawl under a dumpster to get the key to then get into the apartment, and they were like, talk to no one. Like, do not.
The rules have definitely evolved to be much more stringent. So, but I think that's a big part of rental arbitrage and really just real estate, Airbnb investing broadly is the regulatory part. Just making sure that where you start your business, especially for rental arbitrage, where it's compliant with the local laws, that you have permission from the landlord. But also, there's a different wrinkle when you buy, right? Because when you do rental arbitrage, you're really kind of dating the property, like you're renting the property for 12, 24, 36 months. And when you buy something, you marry that property. That's a 30-year mortgage that you're committing to. So there's just a different way of analyzing analyzing when you buy a property. That's really critical to a successful kind of Airbnb investing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. As Airbnb gets more popular, all these big cities are kind of nailing down regulations and things like that. Well, vice versa, in Michigan, where we are currently, the house that I'm actually in, it's in a city that's trying to bring in tourism. So when I called the city and I was like, hey, do you guys allow short-term rentals? They were like, absolutely. Here's a list of what you need. Please. Like they're encouraging it more because they want to bring tourism in with these big cities. They already have that tourism, so they're trying to like really regulate how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
One question I have with your arbitrage portfolio is, are all of yours in apartment complexes, or are you doing the single family arbitrage method?
Yeah, we really focus for rental arbitrage. We focus with big multifamily, so we can scale quickly with the same property manager or landlords with 5, 10, 15 units at a time. This way, you can really build up your cash flow quickly. And because operating 1 versus 5, it's really the same kind of work. But if you can kind of integrate it within one building, it's much easier in terms of your operation, cleaner, and then handyman. So that's how we do it, and we then use the cash flow we build from rental arbitrage to buy in vacation rental market.
And just to add on to that point, for us, it's if you have that rental, if you have all those apartments in one place versus, so just think about 5 apartments versus 5 houses, even if they're like 10 minutes apart. I mean, servicing that is just a nightmare, and it's just really, really difficult to scale. But if you have everything in one place that has parking, that has a front desk, has access control, has a gym, those are the characteristics that we look for, and that for us has been successful. And also in these large multifamily buildings, they're in commercial zoning, so that gives you a layer of protection when rules change, because generally speaking, if you're in a commercially zoned area, you will be compliant with regulations that come. And that's true for New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and other cities that we've looked at. So it's harder to start, but it provides a lot more stability to your business model. And for us, that really is like, we want to build a sustainable business, right? That is scalable, right? That we're focused on quality and not quantity. Because for us, it's not about building 100, 200 units, right? That's candidly irrelevant for us. It's really like how much cash that's in our pocket at the end of the year after Uncle Sam takes his cut, right? Like that is the most important metric for us. It's not a vanity metric like revenue, for example.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I'm preaching to the choir there. Well, and I think what's interesting too about your model is that, a lot of people who are entering the space for the very first time are looking at arbitrage as their way to get in, right? It's like either arbitrage or co-hosting. And, a lot of coaches out there will say, like, hey, do not go into these big apartment complexes because you're not going to get the attention of the owner of that building, and the management company in the front office is not going to, allow you to have one unit in that building that you run as an Airbnb. But with that being said, the people who do get the attention of those complexes are people who are coming in and offering to take up 5, 10, 15 units. I mean, that you have to have that on the table for you to get anyone's attention in that building. And it just makes sense. Like if you run the numbers on it, and for people who like are listening who may not have the capital to like furnish all of those units, you can find other investors to go in on those units with you, and you can come in as one unit and say like, hey, we want 15, and even though that you're only actually furnishing one. But that is about the only way to get attention of those complexes that have all of those amenities. Otherwise everyone's like, nah.
Agreed. But I think for us, I think there's a little nuance in where we are now versus where we started. Right now, we've done this for a few years. We kind of know what we're doing. We're much more comfortable going in with. We just signed a 13-unit deal, for example, a week and a half ago. But when we first started, it was one apartment. And New York is generally apartments, but it would have been kind of one house with a landlord that owned the building, right? So when you do start, it's okay to start with a house, right? That's fine. Like you start with that, you learn the business, you learn how to furnish it, run it, operate it. And then as you get more comfortable with the business, then you can go in and go to the apartment buildings and get multiple units. So, I really just want to make sure that when people are listening, it's a progression. It's like with anything in life, right? You learn how to crawl first before you learn how to walk, and then you learn how to run. We've been doing this for a long time, so we're running right now. But when we started, we were crawling just the same. So don't be, I would encourage people not to be intimidated by that, because, if you never start, then you'll never be successful. Like taking that first step really is critical. I think for us, that's why we're, been lucky, just like taking that first step and like, okay, this works. Wow. Okay. Let's grow on that. But if we never started, we'd never be where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you talked about like sustainably growing your business. And I know a lot of people, the journeys that we've seen is they get into arbitrage and they do like what you said, it creates cash flow to then purchase properties. And then they kind of start phasing out of arbitrage and just purchasing more properties. Do you see yourself going that way, or do you see them continuing to run parallel where you're just getting more and more arbitrage and then using that cash flow to buy more properties and continuing growing both? Or do you see yourself phasing out of arbitrage eventually?
That's a great question. And I'm going to tell you why we're going to do both. There are like 3 key reasons why. First is you want to have both strategies because there's different market environments where one works better than the other. I would say over the last 12, 18 months, the rental market's been crazy. So you haven't been able to get good deals from landlords. So we didn't really do that. Like we kind of paused on the arbitrage and really focused on buying because rates were low. But now the situation is different. Rates are higher. And there's a lot more multifamily inventory in a lot of these cities, and rents are coming down, and landlords are more open to rental arbitrage. So now we can flip over to the arbitrage strategy. We bought six houses in the last 2.5 years, and this year we may buy 1 or 2. So having both skill sets is really important. If you are a Airbnb investor, right? Like this is a vocation, this is something that you're really dedicated to. That is the path, right? You need to have multiple skill sets. So that's one. 2 is there's tremendous tax benefits from having both an arbitrage strategy and buying and holding. And I won't go into too much detail, but in the end, what you can do is if you buy property, and then you do bonus depreciation through cost segregation studies, you can protect your entire Airbnb income. So everything that you're making on arbitrage, you can shield that from federal taxation and use that to go and reinvest in your business and grow a lot faster. And that's something that people don't really understand or talk about. I think with us, with our finance background, we're able to understand that and unlock that. So I think that's something that people should really understand. Lastly is if you have a partner, like if you're working on Airbnb yourself, you have a partner that's a high wage W-2 earner. If you become a professional Airbnb investor, which just means that you do more than 500 hours a year, then you can not only protect your Airbnb income, you can also protect your partner's W-2 income. And there is absolutely nothing like that anywhere for investors. So that's why this is such a powerful strategy. And I'll say this: I was an investment bank for 10 years. I've seen a lot of businesses, and I've never seen a business model that works well like this, which is why we both quit, so we can really focus full time on this.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and just to add on a quick point too, like if you're buying, right, it's super capital intensive. You run out your reserve, run out your cash pretty quickly. So if you have this nice loop of rental arbitrage that brings in cash flow, and then that cash flow funds your buying, so you have this nice cycle every year, you can have a predictability how much cash is coming in, how many I can actually buy, right, before you even go out to raise money for investors.
Yeah, and actually on that point too, like we haven't raised money because, I mean, candidly, I don't really want another. If you have investors, they kind of become your boss too. So it's like you raise like some money from 10 people, you have 10 other. Now you have 10 bosses that are LPs. For us, allows us to fully control and own everything that we have, right? So we don't have bosses. That's another thing, right? Because that cash flow that it creates, it really allows you to buy more properties. And for us, in the end, this game is about building long-term wealth and acquiring real estate that you own and that you can operate with on Airbnb that produces that kind of cash flow. Like that for us is the ultimate goal, right? That is what everything that we're doing drives towards.
Yeah, I could not agree more on that front specifically, because we talk to so many people who are like really pounding down on partnerships, right? They're like, you need a group of people, you need a support system, and I mean, my husband and I, we got into this originally for freedom, right? Like we got into it so that we could hop in a bus and like disappear for 3 months if we wanted to, and it would be okay. Because we didn't want a boss. Like we're running away from a 9 to 5 to avoid a boss. But when you do start partnering with people and you are using other people's money, I mean, it can be a super powerful tool, but it does not come without strings. And so, if you are getting into this for time freedom and, the freedom to just like step away and not have anyone knocking at your door, then like partnerships are not going to be your bread and butter. Like they may have a time and they may have a place, especially at the beginning of your journey, but that is not going to be your bread and butter if your ideal life is to like at one point step away from it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Agree.
I also like love the point that you made of like having multiple skill sets, because we've seen that with our own portfolios, right? Like we had arbitrage that just came to a screeching halt when COVID hit because they were downtown Dallas. And then you were watching people who had purchased homes that were out in the middle of nowhere that were absolutely crushing it. And so it's not like, arbitrage is always king or purchasing houses is always king. You have to be like nimble with the environment around you and the economy around you, because at the end of the day, the market is determining what's successful. You are not. So I totally agree that having that kind of wide array of a skill set is definitely going to play well for you as this game keeps going.
Yeah, exactly. The game's getting harder and harder too, right? So I think we still think there's a lot of opportunity, but every single year, the level of competition increases, the level of sophistication increases. So, being able to level up your skill set, whether you're a new investor or an existing investor, it's going to be critical to your long-term success.
Yeah. So you touched on this for about a half a second, but as you're walking into 2023 specifically, what is your strategy going forward?
So I think for 2023, the first half of 2023, we have a big focus on rental arbitrage. As Mike was mentioned earlier, we are seeing a higher vacancy out there, and then landlords are eager to negotiate. They are eager to work with professionals. And with us coming in to take a bulk of a unit, we're actually solving their problem, guarantee them occupancy and rent payment for 2-3 years at a time. So there's a lot of synergy out there right now. So now it's actually a great time for rental arbitrage in our opinion. And second half, and we do want to buy this year too. Second half, I think will be a great time. Right now, we are actively also looking, and then we see there a lot. Sellers are starting to negotiate more too. There are a lot more creative financing strategy out there. They are open to negotiate the price down too. So second half, I think we'll be pushing gas on the buying side.
Yeah.
Do you guys see yourself expanding into markets outside of the ones that you're currently investing in, or do you feel like because of the systems that you have in place and the community that you've built, you kind of just want to keep expanding in those current markets?
Yeah, I think for us, we will continue to double down in the markets that we know, but we're obviously looking at other markets that if they're really attractive, we would definitely look as well, like Michigan, for example. That's definitely something that we want to explore. But I would say that right now where we are in our journey, and I think for most people this may be applicable. It's once you find something that works, really double down on that, whether it's Airbnb or a location, but just anything. If you find something that works for you, double down on that strategy, because I'll tell you, it's not easy to find things that work. And if you just spread yourself too thin, like that is a recipe for underperformance, right? What do I mean by that? You're one person. It's so hard to do multiple things well. If you find something that you're really good at, just compound that intellectual capital, compound your relationships in the area, because that's ultimately going to make you really successful. Diversification is great, but really it's much more important if you are either passively investing or if you have a lot of money, you're just trying to protect your capital. But if you have a limited amount of capital and you want to grow that, quickly, and you want to really utilize all that time and energy that you're spending, find one good thing, one product, one market that you're really good at, and just really, really step on the gas on that, because that ultimately is going to create cash flow. It's going to create a life that you want. You're not just spread too thin. You actually can really, grow very, very quickly.
Yeah. And really like dominate your niche, and which I think you guys are doing great on this,
Thank
right?
you.
You guys find the lake house in Michigan. That's your niche, and you're like the number one out there. No one else can beat you, right? So I think that's the same principle that we kind of operate our business with.
Yeah, I think
they're riches and niches.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about being the name in your market, right? Like if people are like, oh my gosh, I want to go stay at Mike and Liz's Chang's, but this one's taken, you can be like, oh, I actually have these other units that are open that I can put you in, because that's the name that they want to stay with you specifically. And so it just makes it so if you're the name in the market and you have so many there, you can always have a place for people to stay.
Yeah, and I definitely think that like so far in all the conversations that I've had in 2023 with people in the Airbnb space, it's that 2023 really is about depth over width. And I mean, you mentioned that, just in doubling down on what you're good at, like you do not have to have a piece of the pie in every single pie that's available in the real estate world. Like there are literally unlimited strategies. And so you really have to find one that you have a lot of talent in, that you're seeing success in, and just double down on it. Down on it.
Yeah, it's really double down. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and
it's less risky actually too, because like if you know a market well, like you're going to have information and data that no one else has. If you go into a new market, you're going to rely on other people's data, other people's opinions, right? And that, I think for us, it's better to have kind of that first party information yourself versus relying on, on third party.
Yeah, you get to create your market instead of have to go into somebody else's.
Yeah, which is a little risky. It's like even with Orange Cadillac, they were like showing off numbers, and I'm like, look, this looks like an okay deal with the numbers that we've got, but like I'm pretty sure it's gonna be one of one, but still, it's a gamble. You just don't know until it's up and running. But I think it's an interesting point too that you make, that landlords are now ready to negotiate, and you're really able to solve a problem for them, because that's what we saw in 2020. Like after COVID hit, once it was in the second half of the year and COVID was like lightening up a little and people were traveling a little again, landlords were so desperate for tenants because everybody moved back home, and everywhere was empty. And so we just took advantage of that. Like we had landlords that were saying yes to giving us their entire 12 to 20 unit building. And after COVID kind of ended for a moment, and it's the roaring 20s again and everybody's moving around, then landlords were like, no, like you can't get in here. And it's interesting to watch that kind of come full circle and then be back in the position where they're ready to negotiate.
Exactly, and that's why it's like, keeping a good reputation with your landlords, and just kind of like having your pulse on that on the cycle is important. I think for us, it's also too, we're looking for win-wins, right? Like we're not. I mean, these landlords are they're very very sophisticated. Like we're not pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. Like they have a business problem, or they have a business need that we solve, right? And we're just figuring out a way where we can do that, where it works for both parties. So they can look for another thing is looking for the win-wins, because that those will be the easiest negotiations if both sides feel like we're solving problems for each other and we're both going to make money. Like those are the best things. If one side loses money on a business deal, it's just not sustainable. And you know, business deals are hard. Relationships are hard to build. Like business relationships are hard to construct, right? So you know those lasting for years, like that's when you really make the money, right? It's like if you get into something and it breaks after a few months, like it's so hard to keep reinventing the wheel every single time. You're just going to wear yourself out. So even if you don't make that much money in the beginning, but it's over a longer term and you build that relationship that opens up other doors, like do that, because I'll tell you, we've done this for a long time. Like that is the path to long-term success. The shortcuts work, but that's what they're called, shortcuts, because in the end, like you're just cutting yourself short.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We've made those mistakes ourselves in the
We
beginning
have
of our journey.
to.
Yes, so
Yeah.
do we.
Yeah. Learn
Yeah.
from our mistakes.
Yeah, and it's all about the people who want it for longevity, right? Like some people are getting into this for a quick cash grab, and taking those shortcuts is fine if that's what you're looking for. But if you're looking to build a long business, those are the steps that you need to take.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And back to your point about New York, right? Like right now, it's not compliant. Are there people doing it? Sure, they are. But that's, again, it's more like making money than building a business. So I think that's, just because you're making money doesn't mean you have a business. And sometimes just because you have a business doesn't mean you're making money. So it's really like having a business that makes money is like, getting those two.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, when I first started arbitrage, I didn't even know I was running it illegally, right? Like I just traveled every weekend, whether it was for work or pleasure. And so I just started like hosting people online because I had an apartment to myself. And I was like, 2, 3 days, I'm in the middle of a city. It's a great location. Like, of course I can rent it out. But the second I found out it was illegal, it's like this industry is already stressful enough. Like you already deal with enough fires from guests as is. And then if you're also like fighting the guest and the landlord and the management company, it's just like it's not even worth the cash at that point. Like it just is one of those things where I'm like, it's not no amount of money is worth the amount of anxiety that comes with this situation.
Seriously. Just do it the right way in the beginning, and then
Yes.
have a stable foundation to build your business
Yeah.
and your life right on that, because you're always looking over your shoulder. I don't know. That's just not the way that we want to live either. Like I think we're just a different point in life. We have a family. We both have professional careers. I think people that are like very early in their careers, or like people that don't have an established kind of professional record, that can take different risks. That I think for us, it's again sustainability and long-term compounding of wealth, not a lot of volatility. Like that's what we shoot for, and that's what our model really is predicated on.
Yeah. Amazing.
Nobody wants to have to jump every time their phone rings and be like, "Oh crap, am I caught? Oh no."
No.
Well, guys,
Yeah.
this has been super informative, super helpful. For our listeners who don't follow you on socials already, one, you should be. So get ready to write this down and we'll have it linked below. But two, will you plug where people can find you if they're interested in consuming more of your content and following your journey?
Sure. Best place to find us is on Instagram. We're at Michael Chang B&B, Michael Chang B&B. It's the same handle on Twitter as well. So if you have any questions on how we constructed our journey, our portfolio, shoot us a DM. Happy to talk to you.
Yeah. And you're like, you've been doing it a lot longer than a lot of people, but you're new to the whole, social media really honing in on it game. So I think that's always interesting because some people will be large on social media, but they won't have as much experience. And you guys have so much experience, so much knowledge, so much wealth to give people. So if you're one of our listeners and you are looking for someone who has time and time again proved themselves in this space, these two are definitely someone that you're going to want to plug into. So thank you guys again so much for coming on the show. And Emily, will you plug our socials as well?
Absolutely. You can find Sarah and I at the Carwells on all social media platforms or on our website at thecarwells.space.
Cool. Well, thank you guys again for joining us, and thank you listeners for joining us as well, and we will catch you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Emily and Sarah.
We appreciate it.